Okay, so get ready because we are going deep today, really deep into Arnold Wesker's The Merchant. It's a really wild take on Shakespeare's, The Merchant of Venice.
Yeah.
And we've got this scholarly article that we're using as our guide today. And
Okay.
it's just, wow, so many insights,
Yeah.
so many interesting things to talk about. We're going to see how Wesker just turns stereotypes upside down
Uh-huh.
and tackles some really complex, like mega themes,
Hmm.
like racism and friendship and human dignity and things that, gosh, are just so relevant even today.
Yeah, what's so interesting about this play is that Wesker takes Shylock, a character who's been often portrayed as this kind of vengeful stereotype,
Right.
and he totally flips the script and reimagines him as this complex person. He's an intellectual, he's got depth, he's got a rich inner life.
Yeah.
And you think about it, Shakespeare's Shylock is so defined by that whole pound of flesh thing.
Right, right.
But in Wesker's version, he's got a library and
Yeah.
he hosts these super lively discussions. Wow.
With both Jewish and Christian scholars.
Hmm.
I mean, it really makes you rethink, everything you thought you knew about this character.
Yeah, yeah. It's completely different. It makes you wonder, how much of what we think we know about Shylock is really just based on, hundreds of years of prejudice,
Yeah.
It's like Wesker's hey, let's, really look at these assumptions that we have,
Yeah, totally. And I think by showing Shylock as this, man of knowledge and culture, he's really breaking down that stereotypical image of, the greedy Jewish moneylender.
Right.
And that's where the whole library thing becomes really important.
Yeah.
Because it's not just about, intellectual pursuits, but it's also kind of a way of pushing back against that prejudice
Hmm.
and that ignorance that tries to define him,
Yeah.
just based on his religion.
Oh, that's such a good point. It's a safe space.
Right.
Where he can just be himself.
Yes, exactly. And, speaking of defying those social norms, Wesker really emphasizes the fact that there's a real friendship.
Okay. Between Shylock and Antonia, who's a Christian merchant.
Yeah.
This friendship is really important in the play, and it challenges those strict social rules of the time. Even the pound of flesh agreement, which in Shakespeare is this really heavy thing.
Yeah.
It starts out as a joke between them.
Wow.
A lighthearted thing between two friends. It shows how much they trust each other.
I think that's so interesting because in Shakespeare's play, it felt so sinister, almost like you knew something bad was going to happen.
Right.
But in Wesker's version, it's they're such good friends. It's wow, look how easily something meant as a joke can become something totally different.
Right. And that's where the politics of the play becomes so important. Wesker really shows us how the political situation in Venice is changing.
Okay.
And there are these stricter rules and more discrimination against Jewish people. We see things like forced ghettoization.
Yeah.
And for those who might not know, that means forcing Jewish people to live in certain areas, often really crowded, really bad conditions.
Yeah. It's scary how fast tolerance can just disappear.
Totally.
And how easily people use fear and prejudice to get what they want, politically.
Yeah, and on top of that, Jews are being made to wear these identifying markers so everyone knows who they are,
Yeah.
and it makes them stand out even more. It creates so much tension and mistrust, and it even starts to affect personal relationships.
It's almost like Wesker is showing us history and how easy it is for societies to
Right.
become places where people are excluded, and how that can even affect really close friendships. And it's in this more and more hostile environment that the friendship between Shylock and Antonio is
Yeah.
really put to the test.
Right, because the loan, which was a symbol of their trust, becomes a problem when Antonio's ships are lost at sea.
Oh, wow.
He can't pay Shylock back. And this is where Wesker does something really different from Shakespeare.
Okay.
He doesn't make Shylock this vengeful person.
Right, right. So he wants the money back, but it's not to get back at Antonio.
Exactly. He insists on getting what he's owed, but it's not about revenge. It's about something much bigger.
I see. Okay.
Shylock sticking to the contract, it's a way of pushing back against the discrimination that he and his community are facing.
Okay.
It's about human dignity and being treated fairly no matter what your religion is. What's really amazing is that Wesker takes this, what seems like a simple legal thing,
Right.
and turns it into this huge exploration of power and prejudice and the fight for equality.
I want to hear more about what happens in the trial scene.
Okay.
I mean, it's the biggest moment in both Shakespeare's play and Wesker's.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So how does Wesker use the trial to really explore those themes?
Well, in Wesker's version, the trial becomes this really intense debate about religious tolerance and human dignity and the fight against oppression.
Wow.
It's not just about the pound of flesh anymore. It's about Shylock demanding to be treated equally under the law. He's showing everyone how hypocritical Venetian society is, claiming to be just, but at the same time, treating Jewish people so unfairly. It's a scene that really gets to the heart of what Wesker's trying to say about prejudice, how sneaky it is,
Right.
and how much courage it takes to stand up to it.
I bet that scene is just so powerful
Oh, yeah.
and thought-provoking. It makes you think, like, what would I do if I were Shylock?
Yeah.
Would I fight for my rights even if it seemed like I was going to lose?
Absolutely. And it's not just Shylock's struggle that we see. Wesker also has this really interesting love story between Jessica, Shylock's daughter, and Lorenzo, a Christian guy.
Okay.
Their relationship adds another layer of complexity to the play. It shows just how tough it was to be in love during a time of so much intolerance.
Yeah, it makes you think about identity.
Yeah.
Jessica's caught between her Jewish heritage and her love for this Christian guy.
Right.
It's not an easy decision for her. And it brings up some really interesting questions about, like, fitting into a new culture versus holding on to your own.
Yeah.
Does really belonging somewhere mean giving up who you are?
It's such a good question, and I think Wesker gives us some really interesting answers through Shylock and the Jewish community. And speaking of challenging those social moments, remember those intellectual gatherings that Shylock has in his library?
Oh, yeah, those are fascinating. It was like getting a peek into this secret world where people from different backgrounds could come together and just talk.
Uh-huh.
I loved how Wester showed both Jewish and Christian scholars, like, really debating ideas and disagreeing,
Right?
but also, like, finding common ground because they both loved knowledge.
I know, right? Those scenes felt so hopeful, almost like a dream. Like Wesker was showing us what a tolerant society could look like,
Yeah.
where differences are seen as a good thing, not a threat. And it makes you think, wow, imagine what we could do if we approached our own disagreements with that same kind of curiosity and respect.
It's such a powerful message. It reminds me of that quote by Nelson Mandela. Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world.
Yeah.
And it's like what Shylock is doing in those library scenes, he's using education to, like, break down walls and create empathy, create a space where people can connect no matter what their religion or background is.
That's such a great connection. It's like he's creating a mini version of the world he wants to see.
Yeah.
A world where knowledge and understanding are more important than fear and prejudice. But of course, Wesker doesn't pretend that the world outside the library is perfect. He shows us that even as Shylock is trying to create these pockets of tolerance,
Right.
he's still dealing with a society that's getting more and more hostile towards Jewish people. Those discriminatory laws we talked about earlier, being forced into the ghetto, having to wear those markers,
Yeah.
it creates this atmosphere of fear and suspicion that's really hard to escape.
It's sad to see how these pressures, like, weigh on Shylock and the Jewish community,
Yeah.
even as they try to hold on to their traditions and their hope. It shows how easily intolerance can take over
Right.
and how hard it is to fight back once it gets going.
And what's interesting is how Wesker shows how different people react to this growing discrimination. Some people just stay silent, they're okay with the bad things happening around them. They act like everything's fine, maybe because they're afraid,
Right.
or maybe they think it's not their problem to fix.
It's like a reminder that saying nothing can be just as bad as actually doing something wrong.
Yeah.
It lets prejudice grow,
Yeah.
and it sends the message that the people being targeted are alone, with no one to help them.
Exactly. And then there are people like Antonio who are fighting with their own biases, even though they're friends with Shylock.
Okay.
They represent how complex people are,
Right.
We can have beliefs and feelings that contradict each other, sometimes without even realizing it.
I thought Antonio was so interesting in Wesker's play.
Yeah.
He clearly cares about Shylock.
Mhm.
But he also has these prejudices that are just a part of the society he lives in. It's like he's always at war with himself, trying to figure out how he really feels versus how he's supposed to feel about Jewish people.
That's such a good point.
Yeah.
Wesker does an amazing job of showing that internal struggle.
Yeah.
And it makes you think about how much of our own behavior is influenced by biases we don't even know we have. It's like a wake-up call to really look at ourselves and how we act
Yeah.
and think about how we might be contributing to systems of oppression, even if we don't mean to.
It's a really powerful message, and it really hit home for me. It's easy to blame other people and say, oh, I'm not prejudiced. But Wesker's play makes us look at ourselves
Uh-huh.
and face those uncomfortable truths about, like, maybe how we are part of the problem.
And it's not just about personal responsibility,
Yeah.
right? Wesker also shows how discrimination is built into laws and institutions and social norms. It's not enough to just change how individuals think and feel.
Yeah.
We have to dismantle the systems that allow inequality to exist.
The play really highlights how, like, power and bias
Yeah.
can create situations where whole groups of people are denied basic rights and opportunities just because of their religion or ethnicity or social status. It's a reminder that fighting for justice means more than just being nice. It means working together to challenge those systems that keep people down and create a fairer world for everyone.
Exactly. And I think that's where Wesker's play really connects with what's happening today. Even though it's set in Renaissance Venice,
Yeah.
the themes of religious intolerance, social exclusion,
Right.
and discrimination are so relevant to what we're dealing with now.
And
Like the forced ghettoization of Jews in the play. It's
Right.
like disturbingly similar to the segregation and marginalization of minorities that we've seen in more recent times.
it's like scary how history repeats itself.
Yeah.
And we have to learn from the past and try to create a future where those injustices don't happen again.
Absolutely. And remember how the Venetian authorities used those discriminatory laws to control and take advantage of a certain group of people?
Yeah.
Well, that's a lot like the systemic racism and economic inequalities that are still a problem in so many places today. We see it in the way some groups are unfairly targeted by the police, don't have access to good education or health care,
Yeah.
and are kept out of positions of power.
It's like Wesker is holding up a mirror to our own world and saying, hey, recognize these patterns of injustice.
Right.
And what are you doing to change them? How are you using your voice and your actions to make a more just and equal world for everyone?
Those are the questions that really stick with you. Wesker doesn't give easy answers,
Right.
but he does give us a way to think about these complicated issues and inspires us to do something. He shows that even though we can't change the past,
Right.
we do have the power to shape the future by the choices we make, the things we do, and how committed we are to justice.
And that brings us back to Shylock's defiance,
Yeah.
Even though he loses in court, he keeps his principles, his dignity, and his belief in fighting for a more just world.
And that ending is so heartbreaking, but also inspiring. It reminds us that fighting for justice is almost never easy or straightforward. There are going to be setbacks, disappointments, and times when it feels impossible. But what matters is that we don't give up hope,
Right.
that we keep fighting for what we believe in, and that we don't become complacent when we see injustice.
I love that. It's a call to action,
Yeah.
It's a reminder that we all have a role to play in creating a world where everyone is treated with dignity and respect, no matter who they are or what they believe. It's so relevant today, with all the challenges we face, like growing inequality, political divisions, and all the hate and intolerance we see.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that makes Wesker's play so powerful is that it doesn't offer simple solutions or easy answers.
Yeah.
It challenges us to think critically, question our assumptions, and have those tough conversations about prejudice, power, and what real justice means.
It's not about pointing fingers or blaming others. It's about recognizing that we're all part of the problem and taking responsibility for making a more equitable world for everyone.
Exactly.
It's so easy to focus on those big issues.
Yeah.
But I think Wesker also does a great job of showing how prejudice works on a more personal level, like at everyday interactions between people.
Oh, totally. Remember that scene where Shylock's trying to buy fabric for Jessica's wedding dress?
Uh-huh.
The merchant is so suspicious and hostile towards him.
Right.
Like, he just can't believe that a Jewish person would buy such nice material for a happy occasion. It's a small moment, but it says so much about how widespread prejudice is.
It's those little, almost unnoticeable acts of discrimination that can really hurt someone's sense of dignity and belonging.
Yeah.
It's like being hurt over and over again.
Right.
Each individual act might not seem like much, but altogether it can be devastating. And it makes you realize how important it is to be careful with what we say and do. And to think about how even small biases can create a culture where people feel excluded and like they don't belong.
That's where Wesker's reimagining of Shylock is so important. By making him a real person,
Yeah.
by showing his intelligence, his kindness, his vulnerability, he challenges us to see past the stereotypes and recognize that we're all human. We see Shylock as a loving dad, a good friend, a man who feels joy and sadness just like anyone else. It forces us to see how ridiculous it is to judge a whole group of people based on prejudices.
It's interesting to think about how much of Shakespeare's Shylock is still there in Wesker's version.
Uh-huh.
On the one hand, Wesker is definitely trying to challenge those negative stereotypes and show a more balanced and sympathetic view of the character.
Right.
But on the other hand, there's still this feeling of tragedy and loss around Shylock, like he's ultimately a victim of the prejudice and hate in Venetian society.
That's a really good observation. I think Wesker's trying to do something really tricky. He wants to restore Shylock's humanity, to show him as a complete person who can experience both great love and great pain. But he also doesn't shy away from the very real effects of prejudice,
Right.
the way it can damage relationships, destroy lives, and leave lasting scars on people and communities.
It's that tension, that complexity, that makes Wesker's play so thought-provoking. It's not just a simple story of good versus evil or victims and oppressors.
Right.
It's a deeper exploration of human nature, our ability to love and hate, to be empathetic and cruel, to
Yeah.
be just and unjust.
Exactly. And it's that complexity that makes the play so relevant to our own lives. We all have those conflicting impulses inside us.
Right.
The challenge is to recognize them, to face them, and to choose to act in ways that promote understanding, compassion, and justice.
It reminds us that the fight for equality isn't a finish line, it's a journey that requires constant attention, self-reflection, and a willingness to challenge not only the systems around us,
Yeah.
but also those biases we have inside ourselves.
And I think that's a perfect way to wrap up our deep dive today. Wesker's The Merchant is this powerful and timely reminder that the fight against racism, prejudice, and discrimination is something that never ends. It's a fight that demands us to be involved, informed, and committed to building a world where everyone is treated with dignity and respect.
So as you go about your day, dear listener, think about the things we've talked about today. How do you see these themes playing out in your own life, in your community, in the world? What steps can you take, no matter how small, to challenge prejudice and promote understanding and inclusion?
Remember, even the smallest acts of kindness and courage can have a big impact. Speak up when you see injustice happening. Challenge those harmful stereotypes. Educate yourself and others about the history and the ongoing reality of discrimination.
And don't underestimate the power of empathy and compassion. Choose to see the humanity in everyone, even those who seem different from you. It's in those moments of connection, those shared experiences, that we can start to bridge the divides and build a more just and equitable world for everyone.
You know, as I was reading this article, it really hit me that these scenes of Jewish life are also a subtle way of criticizing the idea that assimilation is the only way to be accepted.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Shylock really values his cultural heritage and finds strength and comfort in his traditions, even though society is becoming more and more hostile towards them.
Exactly. It's like Wesker is saying, hey, true integration doesn't mean erasing your cultural identity, you know?
Yeah.
It's about finding a way to honor your roots while also being a part of the wider world.
Right.
And I think this is so relevant today as we're trying to figure out what it means to live in a multicultural world and how important it is to preserve diverse identities in a world that's becoming more globalized.
It definitely makes you think about what it means to belong and be a part of a community. Do you have to give up parts of yourself to fit in, or can you embrace who you are and still be connected to a larger group?
That's a really deep question, and I think Wesker offers some insightful answers through his portrayal of Shylock and the Jewish community. And speaking of challenging social norms, remember those intellectual gatherings that Shylock hosts in his library?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Those are some of the most fascinating scenes in the play. It was like a glimpse into this hidden world where people from different backgrounds could come together and just have these open discussions.
Mm-hmm.
I loved how Wesker showed both Jewish and Christian scholars passionately debating ideas, challenging each other's perspectives, and ultimately finding common ground through their shared love of knowledge.
Yeah, right. Those scenes felt so hopeful, almost utopian in a way. It's like Wesker was showing us a vision of a more tolerant society, you know,
Right.
where differences are seen as opportunities for growth and understanding, not as threats. And it makes you wonder how much we could accomplish if we approached our own disagreements with that same kind of intellectual curiosity and respect.
It's a really powerful message. It reminds me of that famous quote by Nelson Mandela: "Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world."
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And in a way, that's what Shylock is doing in those library scenes. He's using education as a tool to break down barriers, to foster empathy, to create a space where people can connect on a human level, regardless of their faith or background.
That's a brilliant connection. It's like Shylock is creating this microcosm of the world he wants to see,
Yeah.
where knowledge and understanding win over fear and prejudice. But, Wesker doesn't shy away from the realities of the world outside those library walls.
Right.
He shows us that even as Shylock is striving to create these little pockets of tolerance, he's still facing a society that's becoming increasingly hostile towards Jews. Those discriminatory laws we talked about earlier, like being confined to the ghetto, having to wear identifying markers,
Yeah.
they create this atmosphere of fear and suspicion that's hard to escape.
It's heartbreaking to see how those external pressures weigh on Shylock and the Jewish community, even as they try to maintain their traditions and their sense of hope.
Mm-hmm.
It makes you realize how easily intolerance can take root and how difficult it can be to resist those forces once they gain momentum.
And what's really interesting is how Wesker shows the different ways people react to this rising tide of discrimination. Some characters choose to stay silent,
Right.
like they're complicit in the injustices happening around them. They go about their lives as if nothing is wrong, maybe out of fear, maybe because they think it's not their problem to fix.
It's a scary reminder that silence can be just as dangerous as actively participating in wrongdoing. It allows prejudice to fester and grow, and it sends a message that those who are being targeted are on their own.
You're absolutely right. And then you have characters like Antonio who are struggling with their own internal biases, even while maintaining a friendship with Shylock.
Yeah.
They represent the complexity of human nature, how we can have conflicting beliefs and emotions, sometimes without even realizing it.
I found Antonio to be such a fascinating character in Wesker's version. He genuinely cares for Shylock, yet he also harbors these unconscious prejudices that are deeply ingrained in the society he lives in.
Right.
It's like he's constantly battling with himself, trying to reconcile his personal feelings with the societal norms that tell him how he's supposed to view and interact with Jewish people.
Wesker captures that internal struggle so well. It makes you think about how much of our own behavior is shaped by unconscious biases that we might not even be aware of. It's a call for self-reflection, a challenge to examine our own beliefs and actions, and to consider how we might be contributing to systems of oppression, even unintentionally.
It's a powerful message, and it really resonated with me. It's easy to point fingers at others and say, I'm not prejudiced, but Wesker's play makes us look inward, to confront those uncomfortable truths about ourselves and the ways in which we might be complicit in perpetuating harmful stereotypes.
And it's not just about individual responsibility, right?
Right.
Wesker also highlights the systemic nature of discrimination, showing how prejudice becomes embedded in laws, institutions, and social norms. It's not enough to simply change individual hearts and minds. We have to dismantle the very structures that allow inequality to thrive.
Right. The play really shines a light on how power dynamics and systemic biases can create a situation where entire groups of people are denied basic rights and opportunities simply because of their faith, ethnicity, or social status. It's a reminder that fighting for justice requires more than just individual acts of kindness. It demands a collective effort to challenge those systems of oppression and to create a more equitable world for everyone.
Exactly. And I think that's where Wesker's play connects so powerfully to our own time. Even though it's set in Renaissance Venice, the themes of religious intolerance, social exclusion, and systemic discrimination resonate deeply with contemporary issues. The forced ghettoization of Jews in the play, for instance, has disturbing parallels with the segregation and marginalization of minority groups that we've witnessed in more recent times.
It's a stark reminder that history often repeats itself, and that we have a responsibility to learn from the past and to work towards a future where such injustices are never repeated.
And remember how the Venetian authorities used those discriminatory laws to control and exploit a specific segment of society. Well, that resonates with the systemic racism and economic inequalities that continue to plague many societies today. We see it in the way certain groups are disproportionately targeted by law enforcement, denied access to quality education and healthcare, and systematically excluded from positions of power.
It's like Wesker is holding up a mirror to our own world, challenging us to recognize those patterns of injustice and to ask ourselves, what are we doing to dismantle these systems of oppression?
All right.
How are we using our voices and our actions to create a more just and equitable world for everyone?
Those are the questions that stay with you long after the curtain falls. Wesker doesn't offer easy answers, but he does provide a framework for thinking about these complex issues and for inspiring us to take action. He shows us that even though we may not be able to change the past, we have the power to shape the future through our choices, our actions, and our unwavering commitment to justice.
And that brings us back to Shylock's defiance in the face of defeat. He may not win the legal battle in the courtroom, but he retains his principles, his dignity, and his commitment to fighting for a more just world.
And that ending, for me, is both heartbreaking and inspiring. It's a reminder that the fight for justice is rarely easy or straightforward. There will be setbacks, disappointments, and moments where the odds seem insurmountable. But what matters is that we never give up hope, that we never stop fighting for what we believe in, and that we never allow ourselves to become complacent in the face of injustice.
I love that perspective. It's a call to action, a reminder that we all have a role to play in creating a world where everyone is treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their background or beliefs. It's a message that feels incredibly relevant today as we grapple with so many challenges, from rising inequality to political polarization to the resurgence of hate and intolerance.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that makes Wesker's play so powerful is that it doesn't offer easy solutions or simplistic answers. It challenges us to think critically, to question our assumptions, and to engage in those difficult conversations about prejudice, power, and the meaning of true justice.
It's not just about pointing fingers or blaming others. It's about acknowledging our own complicity in systems of oppression and about taking responsibility for creating a more equitable world for everyone.
Yeah.
It's so easy to just think about the big picture stuff.
Yeah.
But Wesker also shows us how prejudice works on a personal level, like in those everyday interactions.
Oh, absolutely. Remember that scene where Shylock is trying to buy fabric for Jessica's wedding dress?
Mm-hmm.
And he's met with so much suspicion and hostility from the merchant. The merchant refuses to believe that a Jewish person would buy such fine material for something so happy.
Right.
It's a small thing, but it speaks volumes about how prejudice is everywhere, you know?
It's those small, seemingly insignificant moments of discrimination that chip away at someone's sense of dignity and belonging. It's like being attacked 1,000 times over. Each individual act might seem small, but together they can be so destructive. It makes you realize how important it is to be aware of our own words and actions and think about how even subtle biases can contribute to excluding people and making them feel like they're different.
I think that's really where Wesker's take on Shylock becomes so powerful. By humanizing him, showing us how intelligent and warm and vulnerable he is, he challenges us to look beyond those stereotypes, to see the humanity that connects us all. We see Shylock as a loving father, a devoted friend, a man who feels joy and sorrow just like everyone else. It forces us to confront how absurd it is to judge a whole group of people based on preconceived notions.
It's interesting to consider how much of Shakespeare's Shylock is still present in Wesker's version. On one hand, Wesker clearly wants to challenge those negative stereotypes and present more nuanced, sympathetic portrayal.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, there's still this sense of tragedy and loss surrounding Shylock. Like he's ultimately a victim of the prejudice and hate that permeates Venetian society.
That's a great observation. I think Wesker is walking a tightrope here. He wants to show Shylock as a real individual with depth capable of great love and pain.
Yeah.
But he doesn't avoid showing the very real damage prejudice can do to relationships and lives, leaving lasting scars on individuals and whole communities.
Yeah, it's that tension, that complexity that makes Wesker's play so thought-provoking. It's not a simple story of good versus evil or victims and oppressors. It's this nuanced exploration of human nature, our capacity for both love and hate, empathy and cruelty, justice and injustice.
Exactly. And it's that complexity that makes it so relevant to our lives today. You know, we all have those conflicting impulses within us.
Right.
The challenge is to recognize them, to confront them, and to choose to act in a way that promotes understanding, compassion, and justice.
It's a reminder that the fight for equality is not about reaching a destination. It's a journey.
Yes.
A continuous journey that requires vigilance, self-reflection, and a willingness to challenge not only the systems around us, but also those internal biases we all have.
And I think that's a great place to end our deep dive today, Weskers. The Merchant is such a powerful and relevant reminder that fighting racism, prejudice, and discrimination is an ongoing battle.
It is.
A battle that requires us to be active, informed, and dedicated to creating a world where every single person is treated with dignity and respect.
Absolutely. So as you go about your day, dear listener, we encourage you to think about what we've discussed today. How do you see these themes playing out in your life, your community, the world around you? What can you do, no matter how small, to challenge prejudice and promote understanding and inclusion?
Remember, even the smallest act of kindness or bravery can make a difference. Speak up when you see injustice, challenge stereotypes, learn about the history and the current reality of discrimination, and teach others.
And never forget the power of empathy and compassion. Choose to see the humanity in everyone, even those who seem different from you. It's in those moments of connection, of shared experience, that we can start to bridge the divides and create a more just and equitable world for everyone.